Hey everyone, this week we are going to begin prepping for your final project, which is your website that is about you, as well as going through some of the very core core information, core knowledge about how to develop a website. So if you go into the module, CSS2 is what we're on this week, which obviously you're in because you found this video. You'll see that I have these different videos, and the purpose to the jobs and the skills projects that I had you doing in the past 2 weeks was really so that you have an idea of what it is that your people are looking for. So in this instance, and this week we're going to develop personas of who is going to be looking at your site. And what a persona is the person, it's an imaginary person. So you can create, Bob, the client who wants you to design all of his, or Bob and Marie or somebody who want you to design all of their websites and invitations and everything for their wedding, for instance. Or you can have, Jill, the HR representative specialist who knows nothing about your field but will be looking for this list of skills and really just needs to be able to prove very quickly and provide information to the hiring committee about eligible candidates for the job, for instance. So I need you to make up like about 3 or 4 personas of different types of people who are going to be looking at your website, imaginary people. And you can see in this video what is UX design, that these people are actually going through the process. And hopefully in looking at your jobs, you may, the careers online, you may have come across the job titles of UX design and UI design, because they are actually very common. And for people with a bachelor's degree in communications doing UX and probably not UI. UX is user experience. That is where you go in and figure out your personas and, trying to make sure that the information and the flow of the site meets the needs of the people who are going to be looking at your site, or whatever it is. User experience is not just limited to web. User interface, UI, is actually looking at the navigations, the buttons and everything, and a lot of times you hear them used interchangeably, but they're actually two different fields that often go together. So anyway, in this particular video you see 2 web designers go through the UX design process. And I also included this HR recruiting and hiring tips. And the reason why I included that was not because I want you to understand HR recruiting and hiring tips, but more because if you are going to get a job at a company, you will have to go through a hiring. And this is going to be the very first person who screens you. This is why including the skills, the actual words that they are looking for in the job description, is so important in your resume and in your online presence and everything, because this person here, Jill, or whoever we want to call her, she knows diddly about what you do for a living. She was given a description of the job and she's going online to try to find somebody who fits that description. But so she is someone who's going to be really, if you're looking to work in corporate America, she is the front door that you have to get by. So that's why the list of the skills that people that they're looking for in jobs is so important, because you need to use those exact words, because she's clueless. Jill here, clueless. So anyway, one of your roles for the discussion board will be to actually create your personas. And you can have fun with this, but be kind of accurate, thinking about who is going to look at your online presence, who is going to look at your website, and what are they trying to get out of it. Because here is the biggest point. Always remember, never forget, the purpose of your website. A lot of people will say it's to present my work, it's to show people what I can do and to tell about me. Absolutely not. No, that is not the purpose of your website. The purpose of your website is to tell the people who are looking for it how you are going to save them. How are you going to be the answer to all of their prayers? That is the purpose of your website. If you make it about you, they don't really care. They care about what you can do for them. And that is the purpose of everything that we're going to do from here on out, as far as website design goes. Okay, however, even that being said, you need to get some basics of HTML. So you're going to have to click on this files to download, and it's a zip file, and you can go ahead and download it. And then once you download it, okay, here we go. You're going to go ahead and you are going to extract it, and you'll have all of this information. My Mac extracts automatically, so I don't have to do that, but otherwise I would, if I was on a Windows machine, I would right click and select extract. So the website that you are actually going to create today, as if you were not in charge of content at all, because all I'm really interested in is you creating, basically demonstrating some of the key skills, is this site right here. You are going to create exactly this site, except for I'm going to have you do a couple extra things. I'm going to have you embed a YouTube video or SoundCloud if you want, but YouTube is probably going to be the easiest. And also we're going to put some links over here in the nav bar, because I want you to work with pseudo classes. So this is a typical type of layout that you're going to get if you're a web designer. That is a very, very old school basic design, and clearly we're not mobile first as we should be in this day and age, but we really haven't talked about responsiveness as of yet. That will come as you get a little further into the whole web design process. But the other thing that is typical that you'll get from a web designer is going to be a wireframe. Now this is way more detail than what you would typically get, because I put in all of these specific margins and paddings, and that is for your specific needs here, because I asked you in the rubric to follow the margins and paddings in accordance with the design. So that is something that you will be graded on. And then we're going to have some math, because you'll notice that I did not tell you the actual width of this nav, and I didn't tell you the actual width of this section. So we are going to have to do some math here to figure out how to make everything fit. And we can see this is pretty much a 1/3 and a 2/3 situation. It's 1/3 and 2/3, but it is minus 10. 10 plus 10 is 20, 30, 50, 60, 70, 80. So it's minus 80. You can see here that this is 960 pixels wide. So 960 pixels minus 80 is what? 880 pixels wide. Divide that by 3. Where's my calculator when I need it? I'm doing this in my head. 880 divided by 3 is going to be, and we can rough this out a little bit. Let's say like this is going to be like 250, and this is going to be, math. I need a pencil. I'll write it down in a minute. Okay, so that is pretty much the layout of this, and that's typical. That's whenever you hear the term wireframe, that's what this is. So if you want to print these things out, this is what I am going to be working from here as we go into this project. So I've just scooted that over to my other page. I suggest you print it out before you continue the video. Go ahead, pause me. I'll wait. Okay, so the first thing that I have to do is I have this down, And I am going to be working in Dreamweaver, but again, if you're not working in Dreamweaver, I suggest you work in brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to create a folder for these things. And this will be the folder that I'm going to work in. I have so much junk on my desktop, you can hardly even see what's going on. Let's move this over. I don't have any idea what all this stuff is. My resume and all that kind of stuff. More information than you guys need there. Okay. Actually, I can go ahead and close all those tabs. Close my Acrobat Pro completely. Okay. So, I am creating my new folder. So if I go to my desktop and find that new folder, you can see that I keep a bunch of junk on my desktop, which is probably not cool. Okay, it's down here. Nope, that's not it. Untitled folder 2. I'm going to go ahead and call this one CSS2. I'm hoping you guys are more organized than I am, because I put everything on my desktop so I don't lose it. And you can see how well that works, because then it just gets lost and all the other stuff that's not supposed to be lost. Okay, so I have this CSS2 folder, and I want to go ahead into my downloads of the stuff that I got today. And the only things that need to go into this, I gave you this pink dot, because remember in the example here, I have the pink dot in the background. We're going to talk a little bit about how to style a background. And I also have this background graphic, which is what we're going to put some web font over. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these two things. Copy those, and I'll go back out to my desktop and find that CSS2. New folder, images, and dump those in there. It's never that easy, is it? Come on, dot. There you go. Header background. Okay, now they're in there. So the reason why I am not dragging over this example ping and the wireframe is why. Think about it for a minute. Are they going to go on the web page? No, they are not. Therefore, they have no right to be in that folder. Because remember, in our web folder, we don't want to put any junk that does not belong on the website itself. So that is not in there. So I'm going to go ahead now, open up my Dreamweaver. Let's get this thing out of the way. Since I've already created the folder, I'm going to go ahead and manage sites. I can create a new site. Actually, I could have hit the new site option on there, but I didn't. Call this point to my site. If I was using brackets, I would go ahead and just open that folder, because that's the same thing as managing a site in Dreamweaver, or that is the equivalent of it. So that's under File. It would be File, Open Folder. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and make this as big as my screen. My files are over here. So one of the things that I ask you to do in the rubric, if you take a look at this rubric here that is attached, let's view it. Okay, so I'm asking you to use semantic HTML5 tags. All of these margins and padding, float left and right and clear, use of sizing and dimension, you can't do the project as it's laid out unless you do all of that. So really the only variables that we have going on here are using all of your CSS on an external linked file. Remember previously we talked about the fact that CSS can be inline, which is in the tag. It can be internal, which is in the header. But now I want you to use what is the best policy or the best practice for web design, which is putting everything on an external page. And when you get into CSS, really that's going to be your only option. So we want to get into that. That's the way things will roll. Embedding an object and using pseudo classes. So let me just pull this stuff out of our way. Let me minimize it and pull it out of my way because it's not going to let me do it otherwise. Okay. So here I am back with my files. Let's go ahead and make a new HTML. And what does this have to be called? It has to be called index, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this as index. Okay, so now I'm going to pull over our wireframe here. And you can see exactly how much HTML we need, which is not very much. I have my container div, which goes around here. I have my header. I have my nav. I have my, well, I call it a section here, and I think I call it main and section in the thing, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, the div that's here, and then the footer. So I have one container div, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is all that I have going on in my HTML. The rest is all going to be style. So let's go ahead and move this back. I did want to pull up here. You can call this birth announcement. So if you go here into the W3 schools and you take a look at HTML5 semantic tags, what this means, whoops, it flipped away for me. Okay, semantic elements. What this is they knew that whenever people did a layout for the page, they were doing div ID equals header, div ID equals nav, div ID equals section, div ID equals circles. So they were giving all of these things IDs to identify this. So instead of that, to streamline things, they actually made HTML recognize this list of elements. So when I refer to HTML5 semantic elements, this is what I'm looking for. So you may want to go ahead and read through some of these things, because HTML5, when they introduced that, actually made a lot of very cool things. So if you want to get a little bit more enrichment, I do suggest that you read through some of this. But this is what I refer to. But you'll notice that container is not one of those elements. Page is not one of those elements. They're all things that are embedded inside. So I am still going to make the one main div that's called container. So let's go ahead here. Since these are things that are going to show on the body, I'm going to go in here, div. Remember, we always want to have one div that wraps around everything, and this is what is going to allow us to center everything on the page and keep everything in one main box. So I have that. I had my header. I had my nav. I have my section. I have my footer. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip back to this. So you can see here's my header. We have the container to wrap around everything. We have my header, have my nav, I have my section, I have my footer, which is down here at the bottom. And then inside of section, I have another div, and I'm going to go ahead and just call that one article. Or if I look at this and I use a semantic element, I can pick from aside or article, anything in there that's going to fit it. So let's go ahead and call that one aside, which is really, it will define that as, the HTML doesn't define it, but other programmers would recognize that as kind of the side note, something that is not part of the main article. Like, for instance, if you've ever been reading your textbooks and on the side there's a little thing that says, did you know, blah, 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 blah. That's an aside. So we'll just pretend this is an aside. Okay, and so this is just about everything that I need for my HTML. Did I push it down or did I push it back? Where did it go? It's back here. Okay, you can see I have my container, I have my header, I have my nav, I have my section, I have my aside, I have my footer. So if I look at this, right now the only content in there is I have "it's a girl" in my header, so I can go ahead and put that in as an H1 because that will be my main header. So H1, closing my H1. So if you can believe it, that is almost all of the HTML I need for that page. Now I can throw in my contents obviously, but that is the skeleton of the page. That's all there is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. And now on your rubric, I asked you to put everything on an external CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and create my new CSS. I'm going to go ahead and save that. You'll notice that I call everything main. A lot of times you're going to see like main, or you'll see you might have a different CSS for phone or mobile versus print versus whatever it is for the different things that you have. When you start getting into responsive design, and either things can all be combined on one CSS or they can be on multiple CSSs, and you have media queries in there that say, okay, if the screen is this size and use this CSS information, it can be combined or it can be separate. But that's the reason why I call things main all the time, is because there's often times where I will have multiple CSSs applied to one particular site. Okay, so now in here I have to go ahead and make sure that this CSS is linked to this page so that whenever we put information on this, it will show up on the page. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here. And also a thing to watch is, watch up here. Right now I can close that main and you can't see any reference to it here. But when I go in and I link, all of this stuff is just having a little bit of difficulty here. Style sheet, we'll call it that. Okay. I was trying to type in text and wondering why it wasn't showing up. These are just things that the browser needs so it can recognize what kind of file we're looking for. I don't know why I bumped into that folder, but whatever. Okay. Okay, so now you can see in Dreamweaver that I have the source code and the CSS, and I can flip back and forth between the two like this. Okay, so now all I have to do is start styling these things. So this is a good time to pull out that wireframe that I gave you, which I buried in here somewhere. There it is. It would be so much easier if I just push things over. So I'm going to, in real life here, or in my screen, I'm going to push this over so I can take a look at it. So if you have printed that out, that will be a really, now's the time where you want to be looking at the printout of the wireframe. That would be a good time to pull it out right now. So I'm going to close this stuff and get it out of my way, and I'm going to go into the CSS. So the first thing that we have is the body of the page. And the body of the page, remember, if you looked at it, I had those pink dots in the background, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign a background image of the pink dot. And I'm going to tell that background to repeat on the X, and I'm going to tell it to repeat on the Y because I want it to repeat across and I want it to repeat down. And now you can see my dots have gone and they're repeating on the X and on the Y axis. Okay, so now I have my header and I'm looking at the wireframe, or actually no, first I have to do my container. And remember, container is an ID. So I have to identify it, since it is an ID, I have to identify it with a hashtag. So I'm going to say here hash. And since this is linked, it pulls this up for me. It's so nice. Okay, now my width here. And in real life, we would probably say, actually, this is, I don't know why I keep referring to real life versus not real life. Max width or min width. You go here, it'll give me the option. If I type width. Grr. So I have here max width and min width. So let's say the max width is 960. Or actually, for this, since this is my largest, it'll be my minimum width of 960. Actually, I'm just going to make it standard since we're not really into that. Max and min width gets important when you start doing things and you're scaling, depending on what your screen size is going to be, what device people are looking at it. We haven't really gotten into that very much, so I'm just going to actually just do plain old width. 960 pixels. Again, it's my property and the value. So what else do I know about my container? I know that not a whole heck of a lot right now. So I'm just going to leave it at width for container. I can always go back and add more if I need to. Okay, next thing I need to style is my header. It doesn't really matter if you do it in order, just realize that anything, like if I start styling my header here and then I put a bunch more style and I put more for information, things that are at the top of your style sheet will be overridden by the things that are at the bottom. So if you style something, have more information more than once, it does read it from the top to the bottom. Now, since header is just a plain old tag, in this case, I'm not using a class, I'm not using an ID, I'm just calling it by header itself. I don't have to put a dot or a hashtag to call it. Whereas I had to put a hashtag here because I'm calling the container ID. Nothing here. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. And things I know about this, about that bad boy, is it's got rounded corners and it has this graphic in the background, right? And I also see that I didn't put any margins on it. And I see also that it's 200 pixels tall. Well, there's a margin, a 20 pixel margin on the top. No margins on the side. I can either put these 10 pixels on the top of this or the bottom of the header, or the top of the nav and the top of the section. But I can't put it in both places. So let's go ahead here. So my header is as wide as my container. Since I am not dealing with max width, min width, any of that, I could put 100% in there, or I can say 960 pixels. The results are going to be the same. I have my background image, and it has to be the background image because I'm going to put text on top of it. So it's got to be that background header. I know that my corners are rounded, and so that is my radius, border radius. Let's give that, if I'm looking at it, it looks like border radius of about 20 pixels. That's it for right now. Okay, what's going on here is you can see the blue is there, but I didn't give it a height. So I need to give that height of 200 pixels, because that's what I say in the wireframe. And there we go. Now we can see that this is plastered over on the left-hand side, whereas in the graphic that I gave you, this, I want it centered. You can see in the sample, the image is centered. So I'm going to go ahead and make that centered. And where I do that is in the container. I'm going to tell that to margin equals 0 auto. And that's one of those things that you'll just end up having to remember. This is weird that that's like that. I don't know. Kind of like to have these things down. It's how I like to make my CSS look pretty. I should kind of have a standardized way of going about this so I can recognize my code, because when I go back in, I will probably drive myself crazy if it's not organized and somewhat pretty. Okay, so I have that now. I put my margin 0 auto. Let's refresh. And there, now it's in the center. Okay, so now I have my nav bar. If you're looking at your wireframe, not my nav bar, my nav. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. Again, it is just a tag. It's not a class or an ID or anything like that. So there it goes. I see that this has, oh, I didn't do my top. And I'm just going to do margin top for this. So I have my top margin, and I could have, say on my header, I have bottom margins of 10 pixels each, but it's going to be easier for me just to say 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 on here, and 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 on this. You can see that I have 20 pixels here, but what that is, it can be 10 for this guy and 10 for this guy, if that makes sense. So on here, I'm just going to give it a margin top of 20 pixels as I had lined out. Okay, now my nav bar has a margin of 10 pixels all around it. So I can just say plain old margin, 10 pixels. you can see that it also has 10 pixels of padding on the inside. All around, top, bottom, right, left. So I'm going to go ahead and say padding, 10 pixels. Now in here for my width, I got to break out that pencil again. I have paper, I'm getting my notebook out because I need to write this down because my math in my head is a little early. It's too early in the morning for this type of foolishness. So I have 960 pixels is the width. Minus, let's add these guys up, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So 960 minus 80 is going to be 880. And I said we were going to divide this and have this be a 1/3 and 2/3. So 880 divided by 3 is going to be like about 290. And it's going to be a little bit less the other one. So if I make this 290 pixels wide, 880 minus 290. I believe 590. Okay, so this will be 290 wide, and this is 590 because 590 plus 290 is 880 plus 880. Yes, that should all even out. Okay, so there's your little math for the day. That is how we figure all of these things out. But it's, you know, simple algebra, or not even algebra, simple arithmetic is necessary in web. So the width of this guy is going to be 290 pixels wide. Okay. And just so that we can see it on the page, I'm going to go ahead and give it a background color. Typically your designer or whoever did the image, whatever layout was approved by your client, you're going to have the palette and everything, but I'm just going to not a background image, background color. I'm just going to pick a random color. Now what I could do actually, if I'm using Dreamweaver, which is really cool, is I can actually take the dropper. Okay, if you can believe it, I just did the whole rest of the video without my microphone on because I had to restart my computer because it was hanging a little bit. So there's a couple things that are done. I tried to remove pretty much everything that I had up to this point. However, I did go ahead and I left a lot of the basics here that you will have already seen because we already did it once. So I'm not quite sure where I had left off, but I put in the section. Again, just the width, margin, padding, background color, the aside, width, margin, background color, and the footer. So where I am right now is stuff that you should have already seen. Sometimes I hate technology, just saying. Okay. So this is where I am right now. And you can see I put this in. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is dropping down. My main section is dropping down below. So we have to fix that. But you do see I have my 10 pixel padding around that article that was on the inside. So let's go back and take a look at this. The way to get those things so that they float right and left of each other is to actually use what we call a float. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to float my nav to the left because it is on the left side of the page. I'm going to take my section and I am going to float that to the right. My footer, hopefully we can see this. I know sometimes I run off the page. My footer, I'm going to say clear, colon, both. Now if we go back here and refresh, now you can see that everything is fallen into place. This little white thing down here is my footer. So we have everything kind of working as it's supposed to do. So next thing I want to do is go ahead and get some font. You can see I have some old copies of this here. Let's go to Google Fonts. And let's just get a pretty, some nice script. I didn't tell you specifically what it was, some handwritten script. Usually you can get a thing here that lets you search. Here we go. I just want to do the handwritten. I like this one. Let's take that. I open that and this pops up in the bottom. So I need to take this, has my link, pop that back into my source code up here in the header. I can do it right under my CSS. And then the font family, which you can't see probably, I can't scroll that up. I don't know if I'm in view, but it says specify in CSS. It gives me a font family. I'm going to put that in my CSS here. Again, I can't scroll up. Let's squish it and scroll to make sure that I'm in the view. I'm just going to paste that font family in there. And then I give you a size of 10M. And what an M is the size of a standard M in that font. And the value of that is that it's a little bit responsive, because the size of the M is going to shrink and go up, whereas pixels basically stay the same. In this case, since I have a standard size container, it's not really making much of a difference, but I did want to take the opportunity to explain what an M is in case you ever run into it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that a 10M, and I am going to get that pink color. Trying to think of which one was the pink. I think it was the nav color, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take that. Copy, because that is my palette. Oh, it's blue. I don't want blue. I want pink. Which one was pink? Guess I hadn't used that pink. Let's see if it will let me do it. Use my dropper. Oh man, it's not gonna let me use my dropper. Hold on, I need to pause my Captivate. Okay, so I got it to select the pink. It doesn't like to use the dropper for some reason when I'm recording. Maybe it's just too much system resources or something. So anyway, you can see here that it did select the pink for me. Boop. So let's go ahead and take a look what it looks like. And you can see this font, either I'm going to have to go down in font size. I kind of actually dig the results of this dropping down, but it is still a little bit too low. So I'm going to go ahead and play with the line height a little bit. And you know, the way you don't have to have stuff like this memorized. You can go in and you know that if you're using Microsoft Word, it's line height, right? If you want to spread out the letters, it's kerning. These are things that you can kind of transfer over because the concepts have rolled over. So I can just go into CSS and say, I think that's line height. Yep, there it is. And there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Go here and say line height. And let's see, let's split this a little bit so I can see what it's doing. I have my line height here, and let's say line height is 1. It's a little too high. Let's drop it down. Let's say 0.8. I guess I did like 1. That's good. Okay, and now I could bump this over a little bit here if I wanted to. Actually, I don't really mind it. If I bump it over, I may be getting into the... yeah, I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, but let's take a look at how I got the... If you look at the example, it's really subtle, but there is a bit of a gray shadow behind there. It's called a text shadow. If you're using Dreamweaver, it's awesome because you can just go in, open up the CSS designer. Well, let's take a look at how this thing works. It's very snazzy. Oh, but I have it open way down here in the bottom. Otherwise, of course, you can just type this stuff in. And I'm going to say I have here my H1. I put in that it's Pacifico and all that, and I want to go in and change the text shadow. So I'm going to go and say, let's say 2 pixels. 2 pixels here, and just select a real nice soft gray color for it. That makes the text pop out without being really obnoxious about it. I could blur this if I wanted to. Make it look a little softer. I kind of like it sharp, but I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do in here to be subtle. Okay, and you can see what this did here. This went in and did my horizontal, my vertical, and my blur, and the color. So if you're using brackets and have to type stuff in, that's what it's going to look like. Of course, it will help you. But you have to know what's possible. I have about 12 of these things open over here. Okay. So that is pretty much everything that we had in the layout quiz. What I asked you to do also, again, was pseudo links and embed an object. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to embed a YouTube video in here. So let's just pop open some Justin Townes Earl, who happens to be my musical selection of the day. And I'm going to say embed. Hit the share button and then hit the embed tag and just grab this code. Now all I have to do here is go over to my code, and I'm going to put that in my aside. Oops, I see that I left that in there from when I did this earlier. Okay, so that is going to embed that just nice in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at it again. refresh. Grrr. There, and so my video has embedded in there. Here you can see the issue is that the video is bigger than the area that I put it in, so that's sticking out. So I would want to go in here and make that a side. The height is 315. And now if I wanted to, I could actually make it a little bit bigger and move my framing and things around a little bit so that I could have that a little bit nicer. And you're welcome to do any of that to make things fit in however you want it to. The other thing I wanted you to do was to use pseudo tags. So the way you do that, you should remember in here how to use an A tag, and I just put an anchor going to Google. And right now, if we take a look at that, it's not doing anything overly special. Right now, I've gone to Google before and it knows it, so it's blue, but it doesn't have any hover or anything like that. So I'm going to go in here into main. Don't worry about all of this stuff that it adds. Those are just things that were added because of the YouTube player. But let's go back in here and I'm going to push this up just to make sure that I'm not scrolling off the page. I'm getting a little bit paranoid about that now. I'm going to say A, and I have different things that I can do. I can do hover, I can do clicked. And those are going to be the most common. If you go here into your W3 schools and pseudo classes, they're down here. Whoops. Pseudo class. So you can see how this changes because it's when you hover, the background color changes. So anchor tags are the most commonly used. So you have linked, visited, hover, active. So let's go ahead and do some of that. So let's say link, point, or excuse me, dot, colon, hover, and we can do all kinds of things. Like I can say text decoration, because I want to get rid of the underline, so say text decoration underline, none, color, I don't know, turn it to bright red. Background color, so I have that, so let's go ahead and see what's going on. Probably have this open in 12 places already. Oops, I need to save first, or else it's not going to know what I'm doing. Oh, there we go. So you can have just your link. You can make it be a button. So I could say like, I don't know. I'm just playing at this point, just to give you a general gist of what you can do. So you can see that you could actually make a nav bar. by putting spacing. You could put those things inside of a div and have the div roll over. You can do all kinds of things. But those are, whenever you have this colon and then the hover and the link, those are your pseudo tags. So that is really the whole project. I do want you to somewhat stick to the layout to get the idea of what it's like to design for somebody else, but obviously this video and the links and things are not with the layout. Start thinking, because next week your project is going to be to design a wireframe. You'll turn in the wireframe and you will create the website all by yourself. So get thinking on that, and good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.